Cool. What you going to cover today?
My presentation is called 5 Steps to Success. So I'm going to share with the audience some of the best practices that we have seen with customers and how they've been successful with the Nexus platform. So just going to cover those steps, and hopefully we'll have some questions and we'll have a nice interactive session.
All right, cool. Let's see, we're about 4 minutes away from, well, 3 minutes away from people wanting to start up. Anything you want to do as an overview to get people ready for what you're going to talk about?
No, I think we'll cover that during the presentation. It should be pretty self-explanatory. So if anybody needs to grab a quick drink, I guess we have a couple minutes.
That's great. Well, if you're in Europe, you can grab a quick drink. If you're in the States, get yourself a cup of coffee or tea. We actually have had presentations where people were eating spaghetti and drinking wine during the presentation. Now that's relaxed.
Yeah, I just have a little bit of water.
I'll see you back here in 2 minutes, okay?
Oh, okay, I'll be here.
For those of you on hold here, we're with Fernando, and we're going to start up in less than 1 minute. So get yourself set up. We'll be ready to go. You know, Fernando, I meant to say thank you yesterday. And for those of you that missed it, the Delta presentation yesterday was great. Did you get a chance to see them do it?
Yes, I had to actually rewind on YouTube. I had a customer call right at the same time, but thankfully in YouTube you can rewind the presentation, so I was able to watch it. Not live, but 30-minute delay. But yeah, it was great. I'm so happy for them.
What a remarkable story, huh?
Yes, it's been great. It's been a pleasure helping them.
All right. So for the people that just stepped in, why don't you introduce yourself and tell them what you're going to talk about, and I'll disappear and be back in a half hour.
Sounds great. Hello, everybody. My name is Fernando Cremer. I'm a customer success engineer with Sonatype. And today my presentation is called 5 Steps to Success. So what I'm going to talk about is how to, based on some of the best practices that I've seen customers, not only at Sonatype, but other software companies, what they have done to have successful deployment. So let's start by sharing my screen, and then we'll go through my slides deck here. Okay, so you should see my slides, and
they just disappeared. We had them for a second.
Okay, let me try that again. How's that?
There we go. We're good.
Great. So as I mentioned, the name of my presentation is called 5 Steps to Success. And what I'm going to share with you today is best practices that I've seen, 5 best practices that I've seen customers at Sonatype and other software companies put in place that have led to successful deployments of their software. So I'd like to start by first a quick introduction. I joined Sonatype as a customer success engineer last July, so coming very close to my first year anniversary. Prior to being in customer success, I spent 10 years in pre-sales. So I was the guy that would come to your meeting and do a demo of a software or help you with a POC. And I did this for various software companies, as you can see. And prior to that, I spent quite a bit of time in technical support and also spent a little bit of time in QA and consulting. Fun fact, I was born in Lima, Peru, and lived there until I was 12. And I used to do TV commercials as a kid when I lived there. So that's my fun fact for today. So the main question that we like to answer today throughout my presentation is, what makes a customer successful? Is it that they install their software? Is it that they have it installed and they have it configured? Is it that they have people using it, right? What's really the criteria to consider somebody to be successful? And in order to answer that question, the first thing that we have to look is step number one. And step number one is define your primary desired outcome. So what do we mean by a primary desired outcome? And when you think about a primary desired outcome, you have to think about it from a strategic kind of point of view. So here I have a picture of one of my favorite games of all time. So for any of you that don't know what this is, it's a picture of some people playing the game of Risk. So the point of this game is this global domination, right? And in order to achieve that goal, you have to have small moves, right? You have to have little tactical moves. For example, you have to conquer a country, or you have to conquer a whole continent, so you have reinforcements your next turn. Those are little small tactical moves in order to achieve that overall goal, which is to own the entire board, global domination. And I think that's very similar when it comes to software. You have a strategic goal in mind that you need to achieve with the software. And in order to achieve that goal, you must have small tactical moves to help you get there. For example, install the software, configure it, have a training session, onboard teams. All those are small steps that lead you to that strategic goal. So when you think about what's a strategic goal when it comes to Sonatype products, whether it's Nexus Repository, Nexus Lifecycle, and Nexus Firewall, you may be looking to maybe reduce the risk to the organization by reducing exposure via open source licensing, what Jerry was previously talking in the previous session, or exposure to threats by having vulnerable components in your applications. You may be looking to improve build reliability or increase build velocity with the Nexus repository. So the first thing that you have to do is always define that primary desired outcome. And what we find with talking with customers is that sometimes gets lost. Sometimes the folks that buy the product and know about that primary desired outcome hand it to somebody to install it in deployment, and they don't know what that primary desired outcome is. So it's always good to have that guiding North Star in mind when you are deploying the product and installing it, and kind of remember what the end goal in mind is. So that is the very first step. Let's go with step number 2. And step number 2 is to define success. So what does success to you mean for your organization? In this picture, I have some people climbing up a mountain, right? And that's another analogy for a desired outcome. Your primary desired outcome is to reach that mountaintop. But you're going to have steps along the way to get you to that mountaintop. And it's important to define what those success steps are going to be. You're not going to boil the ocean. So we do recommend that you break it up into consumable little steps that are achievable within a real time frame, and that is something that the team is able to achieve and be successful at. So it's very important that you define, what does success look like for your organization? Is it a specific metric? For example, you might say, if you're using Nexus Lifecycle, you might say, we want to reduce CVE 10 components by 50% in the first month. Or maybe we want to make sure there are no copyleft license in any distributed applications within the next quarter. So it's important to start to set up small steps and small success points along your journey, so you're able to see the progress. It's always important that you can communicate progress to your leadership. When you spend budget on a product and you have to later explain why you did that, what progress have you made, it's always good to have those points, those milestones that you can point to and show that you are making progress and you're having success along the way. Step 3 is to continuously measure. You have to always measure in order to know how to improve. So it's important that as you measure, as you go along those steps that I mentioned along your journey, it's important that you measure. So that way you can compare measurements along the way and be able to see how you have improved. So for example, when we deploy Nexus Lifecycle and we have our sessions with customers and give them best practices on how to roll out Lifecycle, we tell them that the first step is for you to scan an application. Before you talk about rolling the IDE integration, or you talk about starting to fail or warn the build, even before any of those conversations take place, the first step you have to do is do that initial scan of your application. The reason we recommend that is because that allows you to have a baseline of what things look like today. So that gives you a nice starting point of what's the problem, what's the scope of the situation that you have today. And then as you move forward and you start to implement those various steps, you can start to measure at each of those steps and compare it back to the previous milestone. So that way you're able to see and track the improvement as you go along the way. This will help you ensure that you're making progress. And again, it allows you to show that you're being successful along the way. That gives us to step number 4. So as you reach all those various steps and all those success steps, it's important that you celebrate the successes. As I've worked with customers at Sonatype and other companies, I find it that celebrating each success, no matter how small it is, no matter how small the step, is very important. It helps you with morale within the team. It makes you make sure that, hey, we're doing something good here. We're making progress. We're making a difference. And that helps you kind of recharge your batteries for the next cycle or for the next phase in your implementation. So as you go through each phase in your implementation and you reach success, it's important to celebrate it and recognize the work that your team has done. And you know what, socialize it in the company as well. Hey, you know, we have reduced the exposure to the company by 25% because of the work we have done. So it's very important that you celebrate those successes, you socialize those successes, and you know, you don't have to throw a big party or nothing, but you know, here in this picture, they're having a little pizza party and celebrating their success. So I think I don't see that enough with customers, and I think it's very important because, as I mentioned, it will help you with morale and ensure that the teams stay focused and their batteries are recharged, as I mentioned, for the next phase and keep moving along. And this brings me to step number 5. And step number 5, it talks about engaging internally and externally. So what do I mean with what this? Well, if we start with first with engaging internally, it's very important that you engage every stakeholder, regardless of what the tool is. So for example, if you're implementing one of our products, you're going to have engagement and involvement from development. Even if it's Nexus Repository Manager, they're going to be using Nexus Repository Manager to proxy and download open source components. So you definitely want their buy-in, you definitely want their involvement. You don't want to hand people down or tell people down what they need to do, what they need to use, but rather involve them and make them part of the decision. You're going to have to integrate with other tools. So you're going to have to involve folks that maybe manage the build systems or other systems that you are going to integrate with. So it's very important that you involve those as well. You also want to involve any executives or any leadership that is going to help you sponsor this involvement. Sometimes you may have to get involved with infrastructure, maybe folks that are working at different team or they report to a different director within your company. So by having executive sponsorship, you ensure that if you are not getting the proper access to the proper resources, those folks can facilitate those and allow you to move along with your deployment. So it's very important that early on you involve the right folks. When we do our policy workshops, we like to involve folks from security, from legal, from development, and these are teams that normally don't talk to each other. And that's a great time to get everybody involved. And we find that many times we have to rely on executive sponsorship to ensure that the right people are made available for those type of policy workshops. So cannot stress it enough, involve internally the right people early in order for your deployments to be successful. And then socialize those deployments and socialize what the plan is. So everybody is in the loop, everybody knows what's coming, and that will make your deployment much more successful. I also talked about involving or getting engaged externally. So by that, I mean get involved with user communities. Whether it's Sonatype sponsored communities or user-focused communities, it's very important to know what your other peers are doing. It's very important to be able to talk to them and learn what works for them. What works for them may work for you. Sometimes it may be helpful to talk to peers within your own industry that have to have the same regulations, have to meet the same type of requirements based on the industry, and might have the same challenges. So being able to talk to your peers is very important, and you can learn a lot from them. So I encourage you to sign up for any type of local user groups that may be in your area, any type of conferences like ours, because you will learn a lot from your peers. From a Sonatype perspective, I will encourage you to go to mysonatype.com. So that's a central location. It's a customer portal where you can go to access our brand new community, which we just launched, to talk with your peers. We are very active in there. So if you have any questions, best practices, that's somewhere where you can ask your questions and we'll be there to help you answer. You can access our documentation. So if you have more questions on more functional, how to install this, how to configure, we want to start using Nexus repository for Docker, for example. How do we set up a Docker proxy? All those type of details are included in our documentation. So definitely go there for any of your more technical questions. We recently we recently launched our learning channel. So we are starting to produce online, free, self-paced learning that our customer education team is putting out. I encourage you to check those out. We're starting with Nexus repository basics, but we're going to build on and add more courses as time goes on. So if you have a new administrator joining the team for Nexus Repository Manager, those are great courses to get them up to speed. And like I mentioned, we'll keep adding more videos and more training courses as time goes on. And lastly, but not least, you can also access our support. You heard yesterday from the Delta presentation how much they relied on support and how helpful the folks at support are. Everyone at support, not just Rich, but everybody in support is very helpful. I see it every day. I check this tickets for all my customers, and I see how they're always helping customers, and they go way above what they're really required to do. You also joined All Day DevOps. So this is a practitioner conference that our company puts up. It's not a Nexus conference. It's a practitioner conference. It's 24 hours of DevOps presentations from practitioners. We've had very successful All Day DevOps already, 2 of them, I believe. And there's one coming up for this year. So it's like this same conference. It's free. And it's recorded. So if you are not able to join all the sessions, it's something that you can go back and learn. But of course, as I mentioned, not only attend our stuff, also attend other conferences that are within your, that are local to you. So for example, DevOps Days is one that I like to get involved, DevOps Days Ohio. Since I'm in Cincinnati, that's a great time to interact with other practitioners, learn what's trending in the industry, and also learn what's going on in the world of DevOps and DevSecOps. And of course, I would also recommend that you get involved with customer success. So throughout this presentation and this user conference, I've been very impressed with how little we've done of selling to you about Sonatype products. So this may be the one time where I do a little bit of selling, but it's just for you to be aware of what is available from Sonatype, customer success. So just to let you know, in case you're needing any help with your deployments, know that we can come on site and do a repository manager hands-on training. So if you are new to Nexus Repository, recently had a customer that they took over Nexus Repository, and for them was this, this box, and they didn't know what was in there and what was capable of it doing. So we came on site and did a hands-on training to let them know what was available and what they could do with Nexus Repository. For Nexus Lifecycle, we have a fundamentals workshop. So if you kind of want to know what we can help you with, just to get started with the very basis of Nexus Lifecycle, that's available. We've talked about the Nexus Lifecycle Policy Workshop. So this is probably one of our most popular offerings. This is when we come on site and sit in a room with you, your legal team, your security team, and we look at your policies and put them in the product. So when we walk out of the room that day, you have your policy set up and ready to start scanning your applications. This is probably one of the biggest kickstarts that you can have to have Nexus Lifecycle up and running. We also have a Nexus Lifecycle Champion Workshop. So this is where you can kind of, after you have your policies in place and you have done some scanning and you have now set up that baseline and you kind of have now an idea of what the scope of the problem is, we can come back and do a champion workshop. And this is when we start to talk about remediation. What are the best practices to rolling out? And also look at remediation strategies, whether it's vulnerabilities, whether it's license usage. We go over things like waivers or setting that this vulnerability is not applicable to this application. That's what we cover during the champion workshop. We also have a lifecycle developer training class. So now you have your policies set up, you know what you're going to do for remediation, but now it's time to roll it out. It's time to have your developers install the Eclipse plugin, for example, and they're going to start using that plugin to select better components. So this is a workshop, our training class, when we can come on site or do it remotely, and we can help your developers install the plugin, make sure they have it up and running, walk them through the various configurations and options and functionality in that plugin, and answer any question. And we'll work with you together to communicate and socialize what's the plan, right? Starting on this date, we're going to start to warn on your builds. Right. Next quarter, we're going to start to not allow you to deploy into certain environments if they have this type of vulnerabilities. So this is a great time to roll out and socialize to the rest of the teams what's the plan when it comes to Nexus Lifecycle. And as I mentioned earlier, and I'll mention it again, it's very important to involve your developers. Ultimately, they are the ones that are going to do the remediation. They are the ones that will have to select a different component if that's the remediation. So ultimately, we want to have them engaged and involved and definitely have buy-in from them. We also offer installation quick starts. So whether it's Nexus Repository or Nexus Lifecycle, if you need help, a little guidance from us to help guide your team to get it up and running and configured and ready to go, we also offer packages. And if you are a customer that's had the repository for a long time or Nexus Lifecycle, and maybe you think it may need a tune-up, maybe it's not performing the way you think it should, we can also do a health check for you, kind of check how you have it configured, what's kind of the hardware that is running on, check how much data you have in it, and we can make recommendations to make sure it's running in its optimal form. So again, if you want more information, you can go to our website in this link down here. These are what we offer from a customer success perspective. Now, does this actually make a difference? I would say yes. Right now, when we look at customers that have used our workshops and things like that, those customers that engage us renew at a 98% rate. And for the software industry, a renewal of 98% is very high. It's really high. And if you renew, that means that you are being successful, right? There's no single measure to judge whether you're successful or not by renewals. Because if you renew, it means you see value. It means that you recognize what the tool is allowing you to do and how it's helping your organization, and you say, yes, I definitely want to invest in this again. So definitely get us involved, and we'll help you with your success. So I've gone through 5 steps, and I lied. I actually have one more step, a bonus step, if you will. And before I get into that step, I'm going to pose the question: is there such thing as a steady state? When we talk internally in the customer success team, sometimes we've talked about getting a customer to a steady state. And sometimes we have discussions of if there is such a thing. A steady state, people think, okay, it's up and running, it's doing what it needs to do, it's providing value to the company. Now it's just a matter of keeping the lights on. Well, that doesn't really happen in real life, right? Because my bonus step, or step number 6, if you will, is to embrace change, right? Change is going to happen, and it happens in organizations all the time. Whether you decide to embrace in a digital transformation, whether your company decides that they want to shift left, whether they want to embrace DevOps, there's always change in leadership, change in markets that you want to focus on. So there's always going to be change in the organization, and that may mean you need to change how you use our products. For example, you might have been using Nexus repository for Java, and now you are going through a containerization movement. So now you're going to have to use Nexus to store Docker images, to proxy Docker Hub. You may want to containerize Nexus itself. In Nexus Lifecycle, you have your policy set, but now there's new policies. Maybe now you're doing distributed applications, which you weren't doing before. So now you need to make sure that you are recognizing that in your policies. So things are always changing. So to say that you're going to be in a steady state, I think that's a false notion, because things are always changing, and it's good to embrace change. Otherwise, people are going to resist it, and that's just going to create friction. But by embracing change, you'll be able to roll with the punches, if you will, and contribute to your success. So I know I'm a little early, but again, I appreciate everybody's time. I hope you have found this presentation helpful in guiding you through the steps that we commonly see customers follow to be successful with your deployments. I will be going on to the Slack channel and happy to answer any questions that anybody has. I'll be happy to join you in the Slack with any questions. If you always can reach us by emails. If you're one of my customers, of course, you know how to get a hold of me. You know my email address and my phone number. So we can definitely talk about any other things you may want to do to ensure your success. But definitely get engaged. To review, the steps are number 1, define your primary desired outcome. Make sure that you define that. It's very important to know what that is and to keep that in mind as you go through the journey. Number 2, define your success at each point, at each phase of your journey. Make sure you define the success. Make sure you are, now into step 3, make sure that you're measuring as you go through each step, and that allows you to know how you're improving and set those goals for the next phase. Number 4, as you achieve each of those phases, celebrate those successes and socialize those successes. It allows you to recharge your batteries. It allows you to improve morale and keep you going through the journey. And number 5 is to engage internally with the right stakeholders, involve everybody that's going to be involved in your deployments, and also get involved externally, whether it's the Nexus User Conference, local user groups like DevOps Days. Make sure that you're involved, you learn from your peers, and know what's been successful for others that you can then implement into your own organization. And of course, lastly, is to embrace change, because change is inevitable. Inevitable. Sorry, it's a word I have a hard time with. So you might as well embrace it because it's going to make it easier. So with that, I am finished, and I will go over to Slack. Mark,
sure,
are you?
Thank you, Fernando. Hold on just a second.
Sure.
There was some interesting stuff here I want to dig a little deeper into. Brown, welcome. I see that you're here too. So if you have something for Fernando, you can jump in and ask too. But one of the things that I thought was critical that you talked about was the idea of how important it is to talk with peers. That a lot of us, because we're isolated, we feel that we're in this thing alone. But you touched on the idea that there's a lot of peer discussion that can happen that can really surface a lot of stuff.
Yes, I found that to be the case, and again, as I saw in my bio, I've worked for other software companies, and I see that commonality on all software companies is that with customers, right? Is that talking to your peers, especially those that have already gone through what you're about to go through, it really helps you to learn from their mistakes, get insights on what they have to do, and especially when they're in the same type of vertical that you're in. So if you're in a highly regulated industry, whether it's medical or financial or any other type of highly regulated industry, it's very useful to talk to other peers that work in other highly regulated industries, because they may find the same challenges that you're facing today. And you can ask them, how did they overcome those challenges? Was it an organizational change? Was it a technical thing that they had to do? So what did they do to get over those hurdles, those challenges imposed by the various compliance and red tape that they have to adhere to? So I find it very important that you should talk to your peers, whether it's and online user conferences like this, but I also think local user groups where you get to talk face to face with your peers and have those connections and those build your network, because while you might not have a question during that presentation or that user group, 3 months from now you may have a challenge. So being able to reach out to your network that you have worked on and be able to ask them questions is very helpful and will help you get over those hurdles.
It's critical. I've actually seen that myself too. One of the things that we have the ability to do is to reach out to our peers in the industry, which I think is great. But most people don't think of it as building the network the way that you thought about it. And I think that's good. It would be so appropriate for people to reach out and just invite some of their peers to lunch.
Yep.
I mean, I've done that. I live in New York City, so it's kind of easy to reach out to the people because there's so many different groups there. But in general, let's say that you're in the finance industry. You can reach out to your peers and say, hey, can 3 or 4 of us just get together for lunch and have a good conversation? I don't think I've had anybody turn that down, because you're not pitching anything, you're not selling anything. What you're trying to do is find level ground.
Right, and everybody likes to talk to their peers, right? I mean, when you're peer to peer, everybody likes to learn from each other. And one thing that I found out is that everybody likes to show off what they have done. I think it's just human nature. So people love to tell you how they were able to implement this, what they were able to do. I have many customers, when I've visited customers, they love to sit down with me and show me, the script that they wrote to automate this, or how they were able to overcome this by doing that. And that can also talks back to the celebrating part, right? When you do something that's good, it's always good to celebrate it. And you can celebrate it by sharing that with other peers in your network.
Great, thank you very much. If you head to the Slack room,
okay,
and make sure that you upload your slide deck there. People are going to want to see your slide deck.
Sure, I will do that.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.